The Intarsia method of knitting uses separate balls of yarn to create blocks of color. This is different from a stranded method in which you hold one or more colors in your hands as you work across a row. In Intarsia, you are only using one working yarn at a time. When you are through with one color, you pick up the next color and start working. Most Intarsia is worked in stockinette stitch. If you'd like to see a video on stockinette stitch Intarsia, check out my Intarsia Knitting with Edie Eckman video. I'll show you how to do Intarsia on garter stitch. You're probably working a pattern from a chart. In this chart, each rectangle represents a stitch and shows us which color that stitch is supposed to be knit in. Because we're working in garter stitch, both right side rows and wrong side rows are knit. You may be more familiar with charts that show each stitch as a square, but because garter stitch is so compressed row-wise, these stitches are shorter and wider, and this chart shows them as rectangles. We'll look at some other chart variations later in the video. This chart begins with 10 stitches of blue, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and is followed by 10 stitches of green, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to be working with 2 full-size balls of yarn and a yarn butterfly for the pink section. If you prefer, you can use a bobbin for this smaller section of yarn, the pink section, or you can just pull out a long strand of yarn that you knit. So whatever your choice, that's fine. You're just going to need a smaller amount of the pink yarn. The chart begins with 10 stitches in blue, and I like to do a long tail cast on for garter stitch. So I'm going to cast on 10 stitches in blue. And then the next 10 stitches are in green. So I'm just going to start casting on with the green and not worry too much about connecting them to start with. So now I have 10 stitches of each color, but they aren't connected. Because I did a long tail cast on, I consider that as both casting on and knitting row 1. If you want to learn more about cast-ons and the right side and wrong side of rows, you might want to watch my video, How to Avoid Bumps on the Cast-On Edge. But for the purposes of this chart, I'm going to consider that I have already knit row 1, and now I'm going to work row 2, a wrong side row. My chart tells me that the green stitches stay green and the blue stitches stay blue. In other words, I'm going to knit all the green stitches, but as I come to the end of the green stitches, I need to connect these 2 separate pieces. Otherwise, I'll just be knitting a strip of green and a strip of blue. To begin to connect them the first time, I need to bring the green yarn forward between the needles. So I've brought it to the front, so that I'm going to hold the old yarn to the front and to the left. So I'm keeping it out of the way to the left, and I pick up the new color from underneath. You can see that the working yarns are crossing right here. And that's what I want. That's how they connect or hold hands with each other. But because I'm knitting, I now need to bring that yarn around to the back so that I can knit. And I might give a little tug right here to make sure that stays nice and tight. And then knit the blue stitches. Once I've knit that first blue stitch, I can drop the green yarn. This works the same whether you hold the yarn in your left hand or in your right hand. If you're an English knitter or continental knitter, it's still the same. You hold the old color to the left and pick up the new color from underneath. I finished row 2. I'll turn, and now I'm going to do the same colors. So it's rows 2 and 3, or 3 and 4 stay in the same color. So I knit all the blue stitches. When I get to the color change, I need to make sure that these two pieces hold hands. So I'm going to take the old color and hold it to the left and pick up the new color from underneath. Let me turn that over so you can see what's going on the other side. I'm holding the old color, the blue, to the left and picking up the new color, ready to knit. Because the yarns are already in the back, I don't have to put them between the needles at all. I can give a little tug here if I want to, and then knit the green stitches. Once I've knit that first green stitch, I can drop the blue yarn. Let's look at the color change on row 4. This is our first real wrong side color change because before we had just cast on. I knit the last stitch in the old color, bring the yarn between the needles to the front and hold it to the left. Then pick up the new color, bring it to the back to begin knitting. On row 5, it's time to introduce the pink. Let's take a look at the overall chart and see what's going on here so we won't have to check the chart every single row. On row 5, I'm going to knit 9 blue stitches and then knit 2 pink stitches and then 9 green stitches. The way I like to think about this when I'm actually working is I'm going to knit until I have 1 blue stitch left, and then I'll turn that blue stitch into a pink stitch, and I'll turn this next green stitch into a pink stitch and knit across. All my wrong side rows will be using the same color that I used on the stitch below. And then on row 7, I'm going to have 1 more pink stitch out. So once again, I'll knit until I have 1 blue stitch, I'll knit a pink stitch, and then a knit across and go out 1 more over here on this side. So I say to myself, I'm going out 1 pink stitch every other row until I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pink stitches. I'll do a total of 4 rows of 8 pink stitches. That's 2 right side rows and 2 wrong side rows. And then I'll start going back down, having fewer pink stitches until I end up with 2 pink stitches. And then I'll just continue on with the blue and the green. Let's see what that looks like in real life as we work that. On row 5, I knit until I have just 1 blue stitch left because I need to introduce pink then. So I've knit 9 stitches in blue. I need to pick up my pink yarn, and I'm just going to leave a long tail for weaving in later and start knitting with the pink. So I've turned that blue stitch into a pink stitch, and I'm going to turn this green stitch into a pink stitch. And yes, I will have a hole back here because these 2 yarns aren't connected or twisted. I can twist it around like that if I want. It's not going to make a lot of difference right now. We'll take care of that hole later on when we weave in ends. But now it's time to change to green. What do I do when I change colors? I hold the old yarn to the left and pick up the new yarn from underneath, and then knit. I can drop the pink yarn now, and if I want to change hands and use my left hand, I can. Row 6 is going to be the same colors. We're not changing colors. We're keeping the pink stitches pink and the green stitches green. Here I've come to my color change. I need to bring the old yarn to the front and hold it to the left, and then bring the new yarn back to the back and knit. On this stitch, I want you to look very carefully at what's going on. This stitch has the potential to be twisted because it is sitting backwards on the needle. The leading edge of the stitch is in the back, not in the front. That's because I wasn't paying attention when I started this new yarn and I knit with the wrong end, so it ended up being wrapped around the needle the wrong way. That's okay. I can easily fix that by just knitting into the back of the stitch. You just want to be careful not to twist that stitch if you had it on there the wrong way because you knit with because you wrapped it wrong or you knit with the wrong end of the yarn. Now I'm going to change colors again. Bring the yarn to the front, cross the yarns, carry the new one to the back, and continue to knit. I'll show you one more row because we'll be working one more stitch of the pink on either side. So I'm going to knit till there's one more stitch of blue and continue with my pink. It's time to change to pink. I want to be really careful to not pick up the yarn tail here. I need to pick up the working yarn. Stop every now and then and make sure your yarns aren't getting too tangled. You might have to take your bobbin or your yarn butterfly and untwist it from the other yarns, or take your yarn balls and untwist them from each other. You don't want to get too much of a tangle on the back of your work. Just stop every couple of rows and untwist anything you need. Keep working back and forth following the chart. And when you get to the end, I'll show you how to bind off for a clean color change. Once I finish the chart, I need to bind off. I'll go ahead and bind off each stitch in pattern. So I'm knitting, I'm working on a right side row. But when I get to one stitch before the color change, I'm going to stop. Here I'm a couple of stitches before the color change, but let me show you what happens when we bind off. When I knit this stitch and lift this previous stitch over, that stitch that I'm lifting over sits on top of the one I just knit. So it sort of moves over top of this one. What that means is, if I knit this stitch in blue, lift this stitch over, and then knit the next stitch in green, twisting my yarn as I go, just as I have been doing. When I lift this blue stitch over the green stitch, I'm going to have a color jog. The blue is going to jump into the green space. To avoid that, what I need to do is stop when I have one stitch left to knit in the blue. So I need to change colors one stitch early. I'm going to knit into that stitch, hold my old color to the left, pick up the new color from underneath, and knit. Now, you may think that looks funny, but watch. That blue stitch jumps over the green, but it's still in the blue, so that's fine. Now when I knit my next green stitch and that bound off stitch jumps over, it stays nice and tidy. I'll finish my bind off and cut the yarn, leaving a tail that I can weave in and fasten off. There's my nice color change on my bind off. I had a nice color change down here, but I have a lot of ends to take care of, and I still have this hole down here where I started my new color. And if I pay attention, I've also got a little hole up here because I haven't woven in this end. So now we need to take care of the ends. I've got a blunt tip tapestry needle. I like these bent tip needles because I think they're easier to use. I'm not going to worry about this end, you know how to weave in ends, or this one. But let's look at what's going on down here on my cast on edge. Remember I said we would take care of any space or hole there? Actually, this isn't too bad. This green stitch may be a little bit loose, but I can just take this blue yarn, go back over here into this space and weave that in. I think I should have been a little more careful here on that cast on, so I might tighten up all these stitches if I want to and bring that cast on edge a little closer together here. I'm not going to do that in the video, but that is something that you can do. If you find that that space is a little bit too much, you can ease in that extra along this cast on edge. So I will just connect these two and then weave in the end into the blue. So I want to work in a diagonal manner, not just up and down, but I might go up diagonally and then down diagonally, however you normally weave in ends. You want to keep it in the same color if you can. All right, now we still have this hole. The reason we have the hole is because we couldn't fully twist those yarns because we had a yarn tail. The path of the yarn is what we want to look at. This yarn goes back and forth like this. The next place that this pink yarn wants to go is over here to the left. It wants to go into this stitch. If this had been a complete single strand of yarn going all the way across, it would want to go through this stitch like this. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have it hold hands with its sister stitch over here on the left. Now I'm going to, now that I've filled in the hole, I'm going to go back and weave in that end securely, working into the pink. So however you would normally do that, sometimes I will work along the color changes like this. Just wherever you want to go without encroaching into the other color if you can help it. All right, so that was one pink end, but now we have another pink end. I better get rid of some of this excess yarn. And I'm going to look and see what the path of the yarn is and where it wants to go. It wants to go over here and then maybe back up to fill in that hole. So I'm going to go back up over here. And then now that I've filled in the hole, I can just weave in my ends securely. You want to weave, probably not weaving in quite as much as I need to for this little swatch. You want to weave at least 2 or 3 inches worth of yarn back and forth in different directions. Let's look at another couple of ways this same chart might have been presented. In this example, both the right side and wrong side rows are shown on the same line, so you work each row twice, once from right to left and once from left to right. This is similar to the way that mosaic knitting charts are drawn. You can see that this chart also reflects the way the actual knitting looks. Here's another example of a chart with squares instead of rectangles for each stitch. While it looks like an elongated diamond, a pink diamond, if you knit every row, it will actually look just the same as the piece we just did. That's because the square rows, as shown, become squashed and rectangular as you knit them. All three of these charts result in the same finished piece. It's just the presentation of the information that's different. If you'd like more knitting instruction like this, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Check out the links in the video notes for more ways you can find me. Thanks for watching.